Hello, everyone. It's nice seeing you today. We have today a great event with Kate Korycki's book presentation, which will be moderated by Vassili Schedrin. So today at Russian and Eastern European Studies at Queen's University, we are hosting a book presentation by Kate Korycki, a comparative political sociologist interested in collective memories and group imaginaries. And in her book, focusing on the meaning and productivity of stories, Kate tracks how narratives of the past are creatively manipulated, how they constitute collective imaginaries, and how those imaginaries structure and justify stratified subject positions in the present. Her research concerns the processes by which group or national identities are imagined and reimagined, and how they implicate gender, race, and class in the creation of powerful, benefiting yet oblivious majorities. In Kate's research, collective remembering is as much of a tool of repression as liberation. So it's about Kate and her book, Weaponizing the Past, explains why and how political elites in post-regime transition spaces narrate the path for political gain and what effects are produced by their preoccupation with collective remembering. Firstly, presenting a theory of politicized memory and then telling the story of post-transition Poland, in which many different political actors narrate communism as evil and connected with Jewishness, Korycki shows how democracy, progressive ideals, and notions of national belonging are narrowed and constricted. And together with Kate, we will have a discussant and moderator, Vassili Schedrin, who is an activist, librarian, research coordinator at the Norton and Nancy Dodge collection of non-conformist art from the USSR at Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University. And same as Kate, Vassili was a member of RIS in the recent years. It's a pleasure to welcome you both and see you both online and have a chance to talk with you. So now I'm happy to provide floor to Kate and Vassili, who will present more details about Kate's book in his short overview and ask questions directly to Kate. And also I invite our audience to also post your questions either on chat or hold them and ask them later during the Q&A session. Okay, so I'm stepping out and coming back to the audience.
Thank you, Irina, Vassili, Reese colleagues. Hello, Rebecca. It's so, thank you for inviting me. It's so good to be in your company again. I am very honored to be invited to speak about my book and hear Vassili share his thoughts and questions, and then from all of you. I'm both humbled and very grateful to be able to speak and hope that I'm able to answer you well. So let me just start my, do the technology bit first. Let me start my screen. So you can see it, I hope. Okay, so the book, my book, Weaponizing the Past, will take us to post-communist in transition Poland. I am finding myself in a very strange moment. As I'm talking to you right now, I'm teaching a course on queer theory, and its readings are inflecting how I see my own work, kind of retrospectively. So especially the notions of transness and their potential connection to powerful and liberatory and yet complicated moments in histories of groups as much as individuals. So you'll see traces of this in my both the talk and the presentation. So as most of you know, in 1989, Poland experienced a profound rupture in a fabric of time. A society organized politically, socially, and economically in one way was within a space of 1 year organized entirely differently. People made into citizens by an autocratic and communist regime transitioned to democratic and market-driven ways of belonging and participating. What is peculiar about this transition is the fact that the discredited former ruler, in the case the Communist Party, remained a legitimate political player. This is not the only way that societies emerge from conflict or regime change. Other types include replacements, in which the opposition takes over and the old guard disappears. There are also transformations in which the old guard reforms itself into a new ruler. There are interventions where an external party steps in and establishes a new order. But in Poland, as was the case in South Africa or Northern Ireland, what we witness are transplacements. That is, that's one good idea from Samuel Huntington, in which both the ruling elite and the opposition forces remain legitimate and viable players in a political field. So something strange happens in places like these, and this may interest all who work on conflict, post-conflict, but also those who work on any notion of transness. So Poland moved from autocratic communism to democratic capitalism in a space of 1 year. All aspects of life changed in profound and dramatic ways. The change was greeted with enthusiasm, but it was terribly costly, and it resulted in many things gained and in many things lost. As I said, this happened in 1989, 2 years after I left Poland at 18. When I arrived back to begin my research in 2013, that is 24 years after the transition, the presence of the past was palpable in all spheres of life. During my first walk in Warsaw Old Town in a space of 2 kilometers, I encountered 9 art or other public installations, and 6 of them dealt directly with the past and the process of remembering. In a matter of weeks after my arrival, on November 11, I went to 4 out of 11 marches that took place on that one day in Warsaw alone. All the marchers were commemorating in their entirely separate ways a national holiday, the end of World War I, Polish regained statehood. One of the marches was organized and led by the President of the Republic. One group, the parties and movements organized by nationalists. One was a loose coalition of LGBTQ, anarchist, and socially progressive movements. Another one, still a tiny one, marched under a socialist flag. I will explain the monikers you see on the screen shortly. So in due time, after I conducted 150 interviews with politicians, judges, housing activists, squatters, artists, academics, I realized that all public conversation was conducted through the medium of memory. The past was invoked directly. It served as a pervasive justificatory framework. It was toyed. It was deployed instrumentally. Some repudiated its use. But in the Foucauldian paradox, even the repudiation of the past was, even in the repudiation, the past was confirmed as the organizing principle or the language of public or political life. This was so true that in 2015, parliamentary elections were won by a party which claimed that communism in 2015, communism which ended in Poland in 1989, was still ruling Poland. So in my book, I take the charge of the persisting communism seriously, not in substantive sense, but in analytical one. That is to say, I don't give credence to the fact that communism ruled Poland in 2015, but I track the political productivity of such a formulation. So the concrete research questions that guided my tracking were why, how, and to what end do political elites narrate the past? And 2, what do the narratives tell us about the way nations are imagined and reimagined or constituted in the mundane political speech? So I was moved to the first question by the empirical reality of Poland, in which the main political parties did not differ greatly in terms of their programs, but despite of the lack of sharp programmatic delineation, they were locked in deep and positional conflicts. And as I alluded to already, they devoted much of their energy to narrating the past, especially communism. And I was moved to the second question, to the content of the stories, by the basic assumption of the collective memory literature, which sees remembering as constitutive to groupness. So more specifically, collective memory literature assumes that remembering is a dialogic process. It is not enough to share experiences. Instead, one needs to narrate it, talk about it, represent it in some collective process. Second, collective memory literature assumes that remembering of the past is deeply partial and presentist. That is to say that what matters is not so much the historical truth about what is being said, but the fact that remembering is done in the present and for the purpose of the present. And some call this process the invention of usable pasts. So in trying to identify what makes the past usable, I turned the spotlight on the process of creative manipulation, ordering, and judgment of the past. And I proposed the concept of mnemonic capital. Mnemonic capital is means by which parties, political actors in post-transition space limit the field of legitimate political players and how they structure their field internally. What this means is that only those who wield mnemonic capital can actually contest leading positions, and the way that capital is deployed assigns stable roles and identities to the players. So the capital is gained by turning to the past and by different ways the parties judge or more concretely condemn the past. And I identify three stable mainstream positions given by mnemonic capital and one excluded position. And I rely on Bourdieusian notion of capitals and add my own, which I call mnemonic. So the three main positions are the patriots who turn to the past openly and belligerently. They condemn communism forcefully by making it imposed by external and hostile others, and they make it hostile to the very notion of Polishness. The managers style themselves as present-day oriented, but they invoke communism all the time, indirectly, condemning it for irrationality and lack of freedom, which in their narration, they conflate with market freedom. Communism serves as a justificatory framework for what they want to do in the present. The liberals, who are the old Communist Party, use the past in a deliberate fashion, recognizing it as an organizing principle of political life. They too condemn communism for its mistakes while retrieving some of its goodness. The objectors, that is, the groups who are shut out of the political game, refuse to turn to the past and condemn communism and are thus not quite viable political subjects. They demonstrate the structuring force of the mnemonic capital. If you do not pay the toll at the tool booth of anti-communism, you cannot enter the field. This slide means to introduce the players, but also show you that they've been powerful for a very long time and that they've been talking for a very long time. So in short, mnemonic capital, the way parties invest in the narrative and condemnation of the past, is what allows them to appear distinct to each other and to their voters. That sharp distinction is a sine qua non condition of competition in representative democracy. There need to be parties, and they need to appear different. Usually this is done with platforms. In Poland, this condition is most reliably in time fulfilled by the way that parties talk about communism. So after sorting the political productivity of the past talk, the stable identity of the parties, I turned attention to the content of the narratives. I accepted the stories of the past reveal the contours of the present-day community, a notion that collective memory takes as a given. But I wanted to identify a more precise articulation between remembering and group identity. So I argued that stories of the past woven in the present reveal who has the power to nominate significant categorical grids according to which humanity is to be sorted. And in tracking the story, I paid attention to the relational aspect. Who is included in the conception of the we? Who is excluded? Could others join? On what conditions could others join? And were others conceived as equal or inferior? So in tracing the narratives, I found that contrary to parties' stated commitment to three ways of belonging or joining a community, which they identified as participation in the polity, self-identification with the polity, or ascription, the three players converged on ascription. In the way they narrated communism, which they did to gain political identity, they all conflated communism with Jewishness. And in so doing, they narrowed the conception of the national belonging to ethno-religious one. So let me kind of unpack this. So let me give you the taste how this is done by placing it within contours of a major debate within the collective memory field. So as I said, collective memory scholars agree that collective memory is partial and presentist, but they disagree on the importance of manipulation in the process of memory construction. So on the one hand, Jeffrey Olick claims that the concept's greatest value lies in a sustained attention to multiplicity, distortion, contestation over meanings. On the other hand, Barry Schwartz will argue that the persistent focus on contestation and dissonance has led collective memory scholars away from theorizing that which collective memory does best, namely how it binds and coheres a group. So my approach does not resolve their dispute, but uses both of their insights in sequence. So I first analyze the multiplicity of narratives, paying attention to how they vary. And second, relying on Schwartz's concept of redundancy, isolate repeated themes and tropes, organizing emergent imaginary community. So hold on to your seats now. Polish, Jewish, and communist imbrications were central to the account of central cluster, the Patriots. So in the Patriots narration, Poles were placed in competition of suffering with Jewish people, and Poles were narrated to win that competition. They were narrated having suffered more than Jews did in the Holocaust. This was achieved by first making communism equally repellent to Nazism, a notion popular in the West and East and problematic, then making it to be existentially threatening to Poles, and third, it was made to be coincidental with Jewishness. In this construction, which recalls scientific racist notions of race, Jews become communists, they become carriers of communism as if pestilence, and as such, they become existential enemies of Poland. This is, of course, this excuses all violence that Poles perpetrated against Jewish people. Poles emerge as innocent, and communism as a hostile force becomes inscribed in the body of a person, that it becomes irredeemably other, as if racial. In sharp contrast, Polish-Jewish relations were ostensibly marginal to the account of the managers. Its framers deplored the tropes of Polish innocence advanced by the Patriots. The party called for a deep self-reflection about the limits of societal indifference to the Holocaust. So ostensibly, nothing could be different from the narratives of the Patriots. However, the story was told in a strange fashion, and the strange fashion or structure, I call it, narrative structure, emerged in every narrative emanating from the intellectual milieu of the managers. The story always invoked the heroic and by definition extraordinary Polish helpers of Jewish people, those who saved Jews from the Holocaust. It relegated Polish violence against Jews to, again, extraordinary pathological criminals. And in so doing, it discursively created vast, indifferent, and guilty only of indifference majority. So queer scholars call this narrative process triangulation. You create two extremes, the middle emerges rhetorically on its own. The story of the communist successor party, or the formation I call liberals, did not address the Holocaust or Polish Jewish and communist involvement at all. They condemned anti-Semitism in 3 short remarks, and then they left the topic shrouded in silence. The silence was significant in this narrative because their authors wrote it explicitly to correct the stories of others. So in such a context, their silence indicated agreement. So as different as these stories were, they shared a number of features and themes. First, each advanced the story from the point of view of ethnically, indeed on one account racially, defined Poles. No matter how much the narrators invoked a civic conception of belonging or claimed to respect individual choice in a matter of self-identification, and no matter how much pride the narrators took in the tradition of Polish multiculturalism, they all segregated the communities in their storytelling. They assumed the authority to decide who was a Pole and who was a Jew, and they did this deciding based on blood. and they relegated the story of those who made Poland diverse to the role of the prop in a drama of the majority or its primary villain. Second, and most concretely, the narratives of the patriots and the managers conflated communism with Jewishness. As I stated above, patriots did it openly and directly. They just declared it so. The managers ostensibly rejected Jew as communist conflation. Its storytellers called it a myth and a superstition. Curiously, however, when Jewish people made it into the story, they were narrated at the helm of the secret security apparatus, the main tool of Stalinist terror in Poland. They were declared by the Polish storytellers to be A, Jewish, B, legitimately vengeful. The effect of this myth, and it is a myth, is similar to the direct conflation of the patriots. In lieu of the racially coded communist, we are given a vengeful Jewish torturer. Both are invented, and both are invented as acting against the Poles. The communist successor party, the Liberals, did not undermine the hegemonic narrative. Indeed, it strengthened its power by the silence and agreements. So as such, the three major political camps supplied their citizens with a consonant story of the past-derived, ethnically coded enemy other. In doing so, they elevated the ethnic principle of nationhood, in which one is a legitimate member only by sharing in and self-identifying with the Polish version of history or Polish memory. The only vision of non-members is also ethnically coded and made to be inherently hostile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for this presentation. And let me turn to the discussion, starting from the questions prepared by Irina and myself. But I would like to do a very short introduction into my own connection to the topic. Methodologically, of course, I am not an expert in the field of sociology or memory studies or the sociology. You have the expert in the person of Kate, and the book is wonderful, looking at the conflation of Polishness and communism, with the conflation of so many disciplines, including comparative literature, when Kate analyzes the party documents prepared for specifically for the narration of the versions of Polish history. And my own connection dates back to a very long time ago, like the end of the 20th century, when I had my comparative history exam and area studies exam in the grad school at Brandeis University. And for area studies, my advisor, Professor Anthony Polonsky, who's the biggest expert in the Polish Jewish history, gave me the topic, the controversy over Jan Gross' book, The Neighbors. So in the year 2000, I read The Neighbors. I read tons of the Polish, non-Polish academic and non-academic articles about it. And I passed my exam. And then, yeah, and then I encountered this topic many times in teaching my Jewish history classes, because even in the surveys of Jewish history around the globe, or Jewish history in Eastern Europe, which is my field of expertise, you can't escape examining the Poland. Poland was the biggest Jewish community in the world for many, many centuries. And Poland was the origin of the Russian Jews, who took their turn as the biggest Jewish communities in the world. And now we have the former Polish Jews as the biggest Jewish communities in the world, in Israel and United States, due to migrations, and in Israel, of course. And then I also wanted to look back into our group's history. We started with the film series about the collective memory, and I remember us watching the movie Поколосье, called the Aftermath in English, about two Polish brothers, farmers, coping with the aftermath of these very difficult Polish-Jewish relationships during the war. And I remember discussion with Kate, and very recently, I mean, this topic is always somewhere around me. Very recently, I went to the production of Our Class, the play by Tadeusz Slobodzenek, and it's about the Polish Jewish and Jewish classmates and their saga starting from the beginnings of the newly independent Poland in the interwar period until our days. And that was the powerful play and very good production. And I even wrote a review it along writing the review of Kate's book, which will be out by the end of this year, I hope. So Kate already covered this question in the beginning of her presentation, but perhaps, Kate, you want to add something about how this book was conceived, and if there are any your internal and external factors defined its focus. What motivated you to write your story about uses of the past in Poland?
Thank you, Vassili. I think that I say somewhere in the book that the book is a fruit of astonishment. That I left a place and lived somewhere for a bit, and returned to a place to which I had a key to it. I had a key to its cultural code, but I also had this sense of having been somewhere else, and I was kind of playing this idea of the insider-outsider status, because there are so many things that struck me as the same and so many things that struck me as entirely different. And what struck me was this need to talk about the past almost constantly, the kind of the rejection of that need by a tiny group of people who were then excluded from any conceivable public conversation. And also, and this is perhaps maybe less visible, it's the idea that everything needed to pass through the lens of nation. I mean, we were discussing, feminism, we're discussing queer rights, and like everything ends up being about Poland. And I'm like, what's happening here? Why can't we talk about feminism and gay rights without it being somehow a Polish question? And so to answer you, so there was this astonishment which I cultivated by leaving and coming back. So, I mean, this is kind of a methodological question. Like, I would not allow myself to stay in Poland for more than 4 weeks because I needed to cultivate the sense of discomfort of reentry. Because the moment I started being comfortable, I stopped seeing things. It just, old grooves got activated. So I was just, and every time I re-entered, something else struck me. The Polish masculinity struck me, like on the second go. On the third go, priests and their way. So it was, all this makes it into a book in perhaps not direct ways, but it was just this cultivated sense of astonishment and discomfort and wanting to kind of come to grips with it.
Thank you, Kate. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. That's probably for the private
Let's come back
conversation.
to it later.
Yes. Let me return to the book-related issues. I wonder, you're writing about politics and the parties, what political parties in Poland as such don't play main role. What play main role is your categories or your clusters. Why you organize your categorize your material like this?
Well, there are kind of 4 reasons. And so So the book is about the political parties and their intellectual milieus, right? In like every party will have its think tanks, its, you know, its intellectuals, its little clubs, and etc. So it's kind of, it's about them. But the book is written in English and it's made primarily for North American audiences. I mean, it will be read in Poland, and you know, I will go to jail for it. But that's a different story. But it's meant to be. It's written for English speakers who are going to get lost in reading all the kind of changing party names. You know, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to make this simpler and just call people by like managers, patriots, liberals. Everybody, we don't have any problem with this. These are kind of generic words. But I also wanted to, this book is structured in a way that could be entered by people who are entirely unaware or uninterested in Poland. Like the first part of the book, the theory chapters, Poland is almost absent. So I needed to have generic terms to kind of describe a space of post-transition society in which these kind of positions will shape themselves. So that's kind of one thing. The second, I wanted really to make it visible to readers who actually even are interested or aware of what's happening in Poland, to render sameness over time. So by which I mean the formation called liberals, the formation called the managers used to be called Freedom Union, then Democratic Union, then Association of Solidarity, and now they're called PO. It's the same formation. They may have lost a few members here and there, they may have acquired new members, but it's the same narration that organizes their sense of identity. So I just wanted to capture that kind of the sameness through time. The third, I really wanted to capture the idea that this is a constructed identity, that this is something they invest in and they work in and they achieve it. And they achieve it because no one in Poland is for a second confused who is who, and you couldn't do it by looking at their programs, or not really. Like they're all kind of center right on economics, and maybe they differ on church maybe, but not much. And I really wanted to recover the story of the objectors, because if I simply dealt with political parties, I wouldn't get to the excluded, and I needed to have a framework in which the objectors, the people who are shut out of the conversation, have a standing that gives them voice and presence and kind of does justice to what they're trying to do. So that it was kind of, I needed to do this. No one wants to read all the Polish names with the little S's and Z's all the time.
Right. Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. It gives you, I guess it gives your work more like
Generalizability.
Right. And really emphasizes your theoretical contribution. Back to political parties. Political parties, you subject them to analysis done in different methodologies, including especially like your comparative literature analysis of their publications. However, your focus is their past talk about internal Polish issues. Do they, especially the parties' publications, frame the 21st century Polish nation also by external factors, especially in relation to European Union or particular European countries such as Germany, and also Russia as the embodiment of the communist legacy, because the communism plays lots of role in their past talk.
So your question kind of leads me to think about this kind of distinction that can be made about history as that which happens, and a story about history and that which is said about what happened, right? Like there's this, and the story that is that kind of represents the material reality of history can be called historiography, can be called collective memorizing. They're kind of different enterprises, both invested in the notion of representing that which happened. So in the collective memory narrative, the point is the invention of the usable past. And in the context of that inventing, of course, they're talking about things that are external to Poland because they're devoting a lot of their time to World War II. It's a kind of organizing event of all the narrations. And of course, the reason they do it is because they're placing themselves in conversation vis-a-vis the European Union. And depending on who they are, and depending on how they want to relate to European Union, they are going to be framing Germany as the kind of the European Union and Germany become as if one, and there is a very famous photograph of Angela Merkel at the time standing together with some ministers from the European Union. She is dressed in I think SS uniform. So it's a horror, and it's a cover of a major colorful Polish weekly. And so it was this is the Patriots narration. Obviously, this idea that Poland always being occupied, always the subject of appetites of these two hegemonic powers, etc. And it's a way of framing EU and its notions of liberalism as something that needs to be resisted. Now, I want to make this very clear. Patriots are very clever politicians in that they know that they can't take it too far because Poles love European Union. 80% solidly for it. So a party that wants to go too far with this it's going to overshoot. So they're doing this, drawing comparison between Nazism and communism, and present-day Russia, of course, represents the old foe. The EU, conflated into Germany, presents the other old foe. So this is very good in presenting themselves as yet another victim. But they have to tread carefully because they do not want to lose the electorate that's very much liking European Union. So yes, external forces, and there is external element to their narration and external usability to that narration.
Thank you, Kate. And my next question is about the one of the components of your concept of mnemonic capital, which is the turn to the past and judgment of the past. So I would like to ask about the kind of judgment of the past. You demonstrated how turn to and moral judgment of the past allows for accrual of mnemonic capital and its deployment in politics and nation building. What do you think about the effects of not moral but legal judgment of the past, such as Nuremberg trial and denazification in Germany? And if the lack of that legal judgment would be the reason for emergence of the memory politics in the post-Soviet countries. For example, in Poland, the Polish United Workers' Party was integrated in the post-communist polity. In Russia, while briefly outlawed, the Communist Party re-emerged as the major political player.
This is an excellent and kind of massive question, so I'm probably not going to do it justice. But when I went to Poland with my, PhD proposal in hand, I went to study law, and I went to study law as implicated in as law as something that has to do with memory. Like I wanted to know, what does law do to memory, and that's why there's so many judges in my interviews, because I was really interested in how they think and, how they, so I decided not to write about it because it was inelegant. I couldn't make it into a good story. So I let it go. But so first, very, 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 very briefly, Poland very much had legal measure implemented as it was coming out of the transition. It was called so-called lustration, which is when you're purging people out of positions of authority. So this was done. Poland engaged in very many legal tribunals in which historical events were subject to judgment. I mean, the utility of it, it's like you can, think about it yourself, is declaring martial law, declared in Poland, non-constitutional. I mean, I don't know what was the use of it, but it was clearly done. So I think that law is most certainly important, but in a very complicated way. So Nuremberg mattered mostly for the people outside of Germany. It was a victor's justice, regardless of whether we think this was a good trial to have had. It was very much something that the victors imposed and liked, because it allowed all Europeans to blame everything on the Germans, which absolved everybody else from having participated in the war in a very nefarious ways, as many in Europe have. So Nuremberg mattered to Germany, sorry, it didn't, I'm not sure, maybe Sven can tell us more about this, is to the degree it actually mattered at the time. I would argue that it allowed Germans immediately post-war to not really have to talk about it, which they didn't. Denazification, the kind of the equivalent of lustration, was light. It couldn't possibly not be light, because Cold War began immediately after, and West Germany needed to be roped into the geopolitical struggle, and the penetration of Nazi ideology into the society made it so that you would have to prosecute half the people or more, and that law is clearly not the mechanism for going about this. So. And Germany, even though it had these trials that you mentioned, had a massive out-of-court memory debate. It begins in the 60s with Baader-Meinhof and its violence, when the children of the previous party apparatchiks asked them, "Where were you and what have you done?" And it was a violent and profound conversation, followed by less violent but just as profound historians' debate in the 80s. So Germany has nothing. The law didn't prevent, didn't preclude, didn't shut down the conversations that happened after. And I'm not necessarily sure if law could do anything in post-Soviet spaces, precisely for the same reason. How are you going to legislate against societies that were implicated? We all lived in it, and there were just few people who actively opposed it. So what do you do with that? So law is the tool of memory agent. It can close chapters, it can open chapters, but I think I'll just leave it at that. It's a kind of a complicated relationship between law and memory.
Thank you, Kate. Well, in Russia, many, oppositional politicians believe that it's the cure for everything that we have. I mean, the legal framing of the past. So we draw a line, and then we live the new, very good life. Of course, in real life, yeah, I agree with you. This is very complicated. And this is the continuation of the previous question, and it's about the applicability of your theory and empirical conclusions to the post-Soviet space. So I think that conceptually, the model of mnemonic capital-based politics could be applicable with variations to other countries of the former Eastern Bloc and former republics of the USSR. For example, in contemporary Russia, drawing parallels between Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union is made a criminal offense. And in politics, also moral judgment of the 1990s reforms as anti-Russian is one of the ideological pillars of Putin's regime. Do you think it's really applicable, or it's just the parallels that quite superficial?
So I think that maybe the only place that I would say mnemonic capital is not quite applicable would be Russia. And the reason for it is that Russia is not a democracy. Mnemonic capital is a way of doing politics when you have people contesting power. And in Russia, you don't have that, right? So Vladimir Putin he owns the narrative, and he was very expedient in shutting down Novaya Gazeta and Memorial, the two sources of alternative narratives, which he, by the way, shut down immediately after invasion to Ukraine. So the timing of this is very interesting. He allowed their existence until he invaded Ukraine. So any source of dissonance in the collective space of Russia is shut down now. And so I mean, he has it. He has it all. He doesn't need to. So collective memory. If you want to use it that way, then yes, he has it all. And all the other post-socialist spaces, the difficulty there is that not all of them are transplacements. And you need the presence of that legitimate actor who is going to upset the patriots. The purity is going to be questioned. The transition isn't going to be just have not gone far enough. If you don't have that kind of irritating factor, like in Czech Republic or Romania, you don't see the emergence of the same investment in memory politics. So that's why the examples that I gave are more South Africa and Northern Ireland, where the previous parties are all legitimate players and they can fight each other by claiming the evil of the other in a kind of complicated way. So in post-Soviet space, maybe, but not without modification. But there are other places in the world where I think it kind of fits. Yeah.
Thank you. And the next question is the also extension of your discussion of applicability of your theories to the post-Soviet space. It's about the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. What does it mean? I mean, what this real-time thing that's happening to all of us contributes or complicates your study? How has the political memory landscape changed, if it changed, in Poland since the outbreak of war? Because we know that the Poland accepted many than any other country in the world of Ukrainian refugees, and it's firmly allied itself with the Ukrainian cause and so on. Yeah, what you would add to your book, probably, if so, with this new political reality?
So I'm not sure if I would add anything. And the reason for it is that a war in Ukraine is a present. A war in Ukraine is not a memory. The Ukrainian people are in it now. And Polish response to it is now. This is not the Polish reaction to it, the opening of the homes, the facilitation of life for the however many people remain, was most certainly born from a kind of a trope in a collective memory that sort of says Poland and Ukraine share a horrid geography. Squished in a sandwich between two formerly imperial, now two very powerful powers. Whoever wants to make Germany and EU into a bad guy here, but most certainly Russia remains a baddie. You don't need memory for this. So war in Ukraine in that sense doesn't change anything in the book. And I was telling Irina that if this would ever be of interest to her, that kind of a book will be written in Ukraine 20 years after the war. It cannot be done now. Memory kind of works in a kind of a two-step process. Like after something, you inhale and you hold and you can't talk. This is not, and then you exhale and then the talking starts. And in most places, this happens good 20 years after. This cannot be done immediately. You have to gather yourself for life. You have to, make babies. You have to and memory is something that can be done, must be done after some passage of time. So that book, if ever a version of it is written about what's happening now, is 20 years after it ends.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. Finally, yeah, the question is in more like the previous question, but in more general terms. You finish the book, you're done, your book, your baby is living her own life. Now, now, if you're given a chance, what would you add? How you expand it? How you develop your book?
I think maybe the only thing that I would spend a little bit more time on, I don't know. I would spend a little bit more time on the church because I concentrated on political parties, and the church is present, but only mediated through them. And the church is obviously a narrator in their own right, a very powerful narrator. It's the richest actor in Poland, by the way. It's the actor that has the most access to airwaves. It has most television stations, most radio stations, transmission towers. It's an incredibly powerful political actor, and because it's a different sort of political actor, I didn't play with them. It would be also excruciating for me to be dealing with that much of church stuff. But so they enter the church enters my narration only insofar as political parties refer themselves to the church, and they all do in one way or another. But I would maybe expand the story to include them, because it kind of then helps us understand. My book ends in 2015, and I don't know if it could be continued, because the election year after is not won on anti-communism. Communism kind of recedes, and the same party wins power fighting gender ideology. And that is a major shift. Look, the communist doesn't disappear because that's too useful. You cannot bury the communist, but it's muted, and they win a massive majoritarian election in 2019 by fighting something entirely different. So church clearly matters, because gender ideology is definitely something that locates in a Catholic church. So if I were to add a chapter, or really in some ways write a new book, but I don't know if I have the stomach for the Polish church, or it for me. So maybe someone else.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate.